Recommendation of my chief, and he explained to me where to find a service officer. I went down and interviewed with the guy and talked with him, and he asked me, now that you're out, what would you like to do? I said, I want your job as a service officer. Well, it took me about 15 years to finally get into the service officers program, and that's what's driven me, is being a service officer, helping my brother vets, sister vets, their families. That's what.
For the safety in our travels, we give you praise. And now, O Father, I would ask that you would grant to us listening ears, attentiveness, and Father, to the youth, that you would give them strength of conviction, clarity of voice. We thank you for this opportunity to get a glimpse into the future of this nation, and, O Lord, it is looking great. To you this day we give the praise, the glory, and the honor. In your most holy name, amen.
And please join Beth McKinn, American Legion Auxiliary Americanism Chairman, in reciting our Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be seated. This morning, 3 contestants, each having won their respective department, national quarterfinals, and national semifinal contest rounds, will compete for $48,000 in college scholarships. In the over 80-year history of this activity, the American Legion has awarded over $3 million in college scholarships. You will notice that the 3 contestants are not in the auditorium at this time. Throughout the competition portion, they will appear on stage to deliver their respective orations. I have some introductions for you, and I have some instructions for you. Audience, you play a key role in maintaining fairness to all these contestants. First, please do not applaud until the entire contest is completed. I would also ask that you refrain from taking any pictures or videos. A staff photographer will be taking pictures of each contestant during the first minute of their prepared oration. Please remain in your seat while a contestant is speaking. If you must leave the room between speakers, please return before the next speaker begins. Otherwise, you will not be permitted to re-enter the room once the speaker has begun his or her oration. In addition, please make sure that all cell phones and other electronic devices are either muted, silenced, or turned off. If you happen to be seated near a judge, please do not disturb nor call attention to that judge. Our speakers will be introduced by number only. Prompting in any manner is not permitted. Doing so may result in the disqualification of a speaker. Each speaker is about to deliver an 8 to 10 minute prepared oration on some phase of the United States Constitution. The contestants are not allowed to use notes, a podium, or a sound system. You may notice that the contestants are wearing wireless microphones. This is to record their speech for video online broadcast and will not in any way amplify their voices here in the auditorium. The contestants will be shown time cards at the 8, 9, and 10-minute mark of their oration. If there is a violation of the time requirement, a penalty of 1 point or a fraction thereof shall be assessed against the contestant's total score. There will be a short pause between contestants to allow the judges to mark their scorecards. And before introducing the last speaker, I will ask a member of the audience to draw an assigned topic from the 4 that have been provided. When the last contestant has spoken for 7 minutes on the prepared oration, contestant number 1 will be taken to a private room, given the topic card, and be allowed 5 minutes to prepare his or her assigned topic presentation. I will read the assigned topic to you before contestant number 1 is introduced. If everyone is ready, I will call for contestant number 1. The title of her oration is "The Duties and Obligations of a Citizen under the U.S. Constitution. One person's vote really can change history."
It has been said that one person's vote makes no difference. I disagree. Every vote matters. In fact, history supports this assertion. When the Constitution was originally ratified in 1788, it provided, under Article 5, ways that citizens could add to, correct, or improve the document. Nearly 12,000 amendments have been proposed and considered by Congress, of which only 33 have been approved by both houses. A 3/4 majority of the states never endorsed 6 of these proposed additions, leaving only 27 ratified amendments in 231 years. Interestingly, 4 of these amendments address voting rights. 4 out of 27. That is a greater focus on one single topic than any other subject addressed in the Constitution. The 15th Amendment extended the right to vote to all men, regardless of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The duties of citizenry afforded by the 15th Amendment were largely thwarted during the era of Jim Crow, however. It wasn't until the ratification of the 24th Amendment, which abolished the poll tax, that the privilege of voting became a reality to many who had been disenfranchised due to the separation of segregation. The 26th Amendment, which sprang from the turbulent days of the Vietnam conflict, lowered the voting age to 18 years. It is the change in voting privileges afforded by the 19th Amendment that I want to address today. Come back in time with me to a hot, humid day in Nashville, Tennessee. The date is August 18th, 1920. Nashville is teeming with excitement in what comes to be known as the War of the Roses. Supporters don yellow roses to demonstrate their backing of women's suffrage. Opponents wear red roses. Imagine yourself as a spectator in the Tennessee House of Representatives. The governor has called for a special legislative session to discuss ratification of the 19th Amendment. If passed, this addition to the U.S. Constitution would extend voting rights to half of the country's population. Women would no longer be denied the right to vote. In August 1920, Tennessee is the final state in the Union to examine the ratification of the 19th Amendment. 35 of the nation's 48 states have voted for ratification. 4 states opted not to consider the proposal. The remaining 7 states rejected the amendment. Tennessee holds the future. One state's vote is poised to alter history. The legislature votes whether to table deciding on the amendment, thinking that if it postpones, momentum will stall. An unexpected event occurs, however. One representative, a man named Banks Turner, changes his one vote and supports the immediate determination for ratification. Because of this single ballot, the Tennessee House of Representatives decides to vote on ratification. Mr. Turner, responding to his duties as an elected representative, cast his single vote. But it was not the only vote to influence the course of history on that steamy August day, however. A newly elected representative, Harry T. Byrne, also made an impactful decision. Mr. Byrne was an ardent anti-suffragist and the youngest member of the Tennessee House. Each day that summer, he wore a red rose to signify his opposition to women's suffrage. As the final ballot was being called concerning ratification, and the House vote was tied 48 to 48, to the surprise of everyone present, Mr. Byrne clearly and loudly responded, "Aye." This one vote mattered in that it changed the course of our nation's history. Tennessee legend states that Harry Byrne was chased through the Capitol building and ultimately hid in a broom closet to avoid being beaten by anti-suffragists. When asked why he changed his stance at the final moment and voted to ratify the amendment, Mr. Byrne responded by saying, "I knew that a mother's advice is always safest for a boy to follow, and my mother wanted me to vote for ratification. I appreciated the fact that an opportunity such as this seldom comes to a mortal man. The chance to free 17 million women from political slavery was mine." When Mr. Byrne cast his history-changing vote, he carried in his pocket a letter from his mother. In it she had written, "Be a good boy," and had urged him to vote for ratification. History points to the impact of Harry Byrne's one vote. It is remiss if we do not also applaud the courage of Banks Turner for changing his one vote and propelling Tennessee to vote for ratification. Representing the views of their constituents was their duties as elected officials. Perhaps the loudest applause belongs to Mrs. Febb Byrne, Harry T's mother. She was a disenfranchised, unheard voice who represented 1/2 of the United States citizenry, yet who took the time to write to her state representative, express her political views, and cast her silent vote. Mrs. Byrne appreciated that the duties and obligations of a citizen apply to all citizens and are not merely limited to those who are afforded prescribed privileges or a vote. 3 individual stories of separate votes determined one state's vote that changed the fabric of American society. The U.S. Constitution finally included all citizens, and we the people supported a true democratic republic. Had Banks Turner, Harry Byrne, or Febb Byrne not answered the call to fulfill his or her duty as a citizen, remove any one of these singular votes, and the story changes. History morphs, and our country's guiding principles would not have changed on that hot, humid August day in Nashville, 1920. Voting, a duty, an obligation, one that is critical to the success of our nation. As a teenager, I cannot yet vote. However, my opinions and political perspectives do matter. Just as Mrs. Byrne did not passively stay mute on an issue for which she had a firm opinion, I do not sit quietly waiting for others to decide the issues that will impact my future. Good citizenry is not age restrictive, nor is it limited to office holders. Banks Turner and Harry Byrne fulfilled their obligations as elected representatives. However, I identify more strongly with Mrs. Byrne, who recognized that civic duties extend beyond elected positions. When I turn 18 and can vote, rest assured that I shall, for, as the past illustrates, my vote matters, because one vote really can change history, as demonstrated by the events that led to the ratification of the 19th Amendment. Thank you.
The time for contestant number 1 is 9 minutes and 3 seconds. There is no time penalty. If everyone is ready, I will call for contestant number 2. The title of his oration is "The Safeguard of Our Liberties."
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You may recognize these words from our Constitution. I apologize, they're from the Declaration of Independence. It's a common mistake. In fact, in a recent study published in the Southern California Law Review, author Katie Iyer wrote that a full 84% of Americans believe that the Declaration's famous phrase, "all men are created equal," appears in the Constitution. How well do Americans understand the Constitution? Do we comprehend its importance and use our influence to ensure it is followed? The Constitution is vital to America, and it is our duty to preserve it. Do Americans know the Constitution? The 84% statistic I quoted moments ago was citing a 1997 survey. So let's consider some more recent statistics. According to the Cato Institute, a 2011 Newsweek survey of 1,000 individuals found that 70% of them could not name the supreme law of the land. The Annenberg Public Policy Center of the University of Pennsylvania often administers surveys on the public's knowledge of the Constitution and government. In August of 2017, the center surveyed 1,013 adults for their annual Annenberg Constitution Day Civic Survey. They found that 37% of those surveyed could not name any of the rights that are affirmed in the First Amendment. Furthermore, only 26% could name all 3 branches of government. In their 2018 Civic Survey, that number did go back up to 32%, but that's still a low percentage of people that can name the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. And at the same time, 33% could not even name a single branch. The 2018 survey, conducted in August with 1,008 participants, also found that 27% of respondents believe the Constitution allows a president to disregard a Supreme Court ruling if he disagrees with it. Are several poor survey results enough to indicate a pandemic? Perhaps not. But these examples do demonstrate that a poor understanding of the Constitution is certainly an existent problem. One way that we can support the Constitution is by voting. In particular, voting for candidates that we believe will adhere to and uphold the Constitution. But many people who can vote don't vote. The Pew Research Center reported in May of 2018 that 55.7% of the U.S. voting age population voted in the November 2016 election. While this percentage was up from the 2012 election, it ranked poorly when compared with the most recent major elections in other OECD countries. For those countries for which data was available, the U.S. ranked 26th out of 32. The Census Bureau found slightly better results, reporting that 61.4% of the voting age population said they voted in the November 2016 election. Regardless of which estimate is used, approximately 40% of Americans who could be voting are choosing not to vote. In doing so, they are giving up one of the primary means by which they can support the Constitution. Why is this a problem? Why should we understand and preserve the Constitution? Why is the Constitution so important? First of all, the Constitution is essential because it defines our government. The Constitution delineates the three branches of government, the role that each is to play, and the checks they have on one another so that none becomes too powerful. The Constitution is the basis for how the American people are governed. If the Constitution did not exist, what would America look like? Would we have a totalitarian government that rules by oppression, or a government so weak that it has little impact? Thankfully, we don't have either, because the Constitution, though not perfect, protects our freedoms while also upholding laws that apply to all. The fact that the Constitution protects our rights is one of the most meaningful things about it. The Constitution protects our right to freely choose and practice what religion we follow. It protects our right to speak out for what we believe. It protects the right of those accused of a crime to have a fair trial. It protects an individual's right to his or her property. It protects the right of Americans to vote in elections, regardless of race or gender. Why is the Constitution important? Those are just a few of our rights that the Constitution defends from tyranny and abuse. The rationale and foundation for the government of our country is largely based off of the ideas in the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration states that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The Declaration states that the purpose of government is essentially to secure the moral rights that God has given mankind. This principle is embodied in the Constitution and the form of government that it established. This is really emphasized in the Bill of Rights and the constitutional safeguards against tyranny and oppression. It is clear that without the Constitution, America would not be the land of the free. What then is the role of Americans today? Well, we have a duty to support our Constitution. Not everyone can or should run for office, but our duty to our government is to preserve the Constitution and thereby preserve our system of government, to maintain the government's authority, but at the same time uphold our liberties. The Constitution is not perfect. After all, it was written by human beings, and human beings are fallible. But the founders gave us a way to attempt to correct the Constitution's shortcomings. When the Constitution sanctions things that are wrong, it has and can be amended. One example of this is the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. An injustice that the Constitution allowed was able to be changed because the founders created an amendment process. But how do we support and preserve the Constitution? The first step is to understand it. We need to be aware of what the Constitution allows and what it prohibits. Americans need to be familiar with the supreme law of the land. Only once we are familiar with the Constitution can we vote for leaders who will support it and protect our rights. As Kathleen Jamieson, director of the Annenberg Public Policy Center, put it, one is unlikely to appreciate or defend constitutional prerogatives or rights one does not understand. Becoming acquainted with the Constitution enables us to act on our knowledge. Those who are at least 18 can exercise their right to vote. It's important to vote for leaders who will be committed to the Constitution. Oftentimes, when policies are proposed or passed, we see all kinds of literature from think tanks and journals and other sources attempting to analyze what effects the policy will have. How will it affect taxpayers? Will it impact national defense? Will it negatively alter the economy, or will it create jobs? But how often do we analyze a policy from the perspective of whether or not it is allowed under the Constitution, or whether the entity proposing it has the authority to do so? Considering the effects of a policy is important, but Americans must not forget to consider its constitutionality. By seeking to preserve the Constitution, we can preserve the American system of government and also our liberties. Erwin Chemerinsky, founding dean of the University of California Irvine School of Law, once said, "Ultimately, a democracy can survive only if people are informed about the Constitution. The Constitution is vital to America and must be preserved." Are we informed about our Constitution? Recent surveys indicate that not all of us are. But the Constitution is a document with which Americans should be concerned. It is of vital importance to our form of government and acts as a safeguard of our liberties. The Constitution has not given us a perfect form of government or protected our freedoms without fail. Yet, it has done a remarkable job. And preserving it is important to ensure our government and our rights are preserved as well. For this reason, we have a duty to uphold the Constitution and do what we can to elect leaders that will also uphold it. As Americans, preserving the Constitution secures the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Thank you.
The time for contestant number 2 is 9 minutes and 43 seconds. There is no time penalty. Before I introduce contestant number 3, we will draw for the assigned topic. National Commander of the American Legion, Brett Rystad, would you please stand, be recognized, and will you please come forward and select an envelope? I will announce the topic following the prepared oration by contestant number 3. If everyone is ready, I will call for contestant number 3. The title of his oration is "The Spread of Constitutional Apathy and How to Quarantine It."
As I stand before you today, an infection is spreading throughout the American populace. This infection is not physical. It is not an affliction that can directly harm you, and it surely cannot be stopped with conventional medicine. No, this infection is apathy, and it will kill freedom as we know it. Most of my generation simply does not care enough for the Constitution or its Bill of Rights. In the National Assessment of Educational Progress, only 1 in 10 high school students displayed acceptable knowledge of the checks and balances between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. Furthermore, in a study done by the Freedom Forum Institute, only 40% of the American survey respondents could name a single freedom protected under the First Amendment. The question becomes this: how can we fight and defend our rights if we don't even know what those rights are? Benjamin Franklin said it best when he stated, quote, "A nation of well-informed men who've been taught to know and prize the rights which God has given them cannot be enslaved. It is in the region of ignorance that tyranny begins," end quote. The reason why apathy leads to enslavement or tyranny is because apathy leads to ignorance, and ignorance leads to our rights being forgotten about. When our rights are forgotten about, they are taken advantage of. This is not the first time that Americans have forgot about their rights. On December 7, 1941, sirens howled as bombs, screams, and the rattle of machine gun fire all rang out. Pearl Harbor was one of the most devastating attacks on American soil, and it took the lives of 2,335 Americans. In response, Franklin D. Roosevelt signed an executive order that demanded all Japanese Americans be placed in internment camps. Not only was it an executive order, but it was then made law by Congress and even supported in the Supreme Court. In these camps, the conditions were awful. The hospitals were understaffed, the barracks were cold and offered little to no privacy, and American citizens had to wait hours in lines to receive small rations of food. The government's use of cruel and unusual punishment clearly infringed on these citizens' Eighth Amendment rights. But it doesn't stop there. Their First Amendment was breached when the Japanese Americans inside these camps would attempt to petition the government for a redress of grievances, like it says in the First Amendment. These petitions would often be thrown out, and the people who started them, well, they would be labeled as troublemakers and sent to an isolation camp. Their Fourth Amendment was violated when the FBI would raid Japanese American homes without a warrant, and the Sixth Amendment was completely ignored, because when the FBI would arrest some of these Americans, they'd often offer no legal representation and no right to a speedy trial. This is what could happen to all of us if the deadly mix of fear and ignorance is allowed to blind us. The 2,335 Americans that died in Pearl Harbor, they were in the military to fight for freedom. Unfortunately, their names were used to strip away the freedom of fellow Americans only a few months after their deaths. While some Americans did protest these camps, others simply became apathetic to the situation that these citizens were placed in. And you know what? That apathy is completely understandable. The Japanese military had just attacked our great nation. They'd just taken the lives of many great men and many great women. Who wouldn't become apathetic? But that is what is so dangerous about apathy, is that it always starts in an understandable situation, but it plants a dark seed in our mind that can grow beyond our control. Because the American people forgot rights for all, the government ignored the rights of those of Japanese descent. So, what can we do to prevent internment camps or any other violations of our rights from ever happening again? What can we do to quarantine the spread of apathy? John Dos Passos, an American novelist, once said, quote, "Apathy is one of the characteristic responses of any living organism when it is subjected to stimuli too intense or too complicated to cope with. The cure for apathy is comprehension," end quote. When you walk into your average high school math class, you'll often get the snarky remark of, "Why are we even learning this?" Or, "When will I ever use this in my day-to-day life?" Typically, the students who think in this way will struggle with math class, and they will soon forget the lessons taught in that class. On the other hand, the kids want to be accountants or scientists. They will pay close attention to their teachers, and they will remember how to do every single graph, equation, and calculation. This is not because these kids are more intelligent than the other students. This is because they have a purpose in that class. The same is absolutely true for your common government, history, or civics class. It's not that these kids don't know how to read the Constitution, it's that they simply don't care enough about it. In order for us to effectively teach these subjects, we must teach the reason as to why they're learning it. We must not only teach the Constitution, but the importance it has on our everyday life. We must teach this importance in order to safeguard our future. Ronald Reagan once said, quote, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. Or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like in the United States, where men were free." End quote. Ironically, the only way to stop the contagious spread of constitutional apathy is to start the spread of freedom, democracy, and the Constitution for every American. The greatest evil of all is when we allow ourselves to not care and to become bystanders as people we don't know become victimized. Edmund Burke put it simply, quote, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men should do nothing," end quote. So, will you stand by as America becomes infected by apathy, diseased, oozing the black bile of tyranny, or will you stand up and protect the Constitution for your children? Will you teach them that the constitutional purpose of the government is to ensure that all Americans have their rights protected? Will you teach them the supreme law of the land so they can effectively function in our democracy? America is an amazing place, known around the world for its freedom, its opportunity, and its prosperity for all. It is our duty to keep it that way. We must invent new ways to thwart this apathy. We must promote the Constitution in our classrooms, and we must honor those who have fought for our freedom by fighting for every American's freedom. I guess that apathy can be stopped with medicine. We are that medicine, and we should never let apathy dilute our potency. Thank you.
The time for contestant number 3 is 8 minutes and 44 seconds. There is no time penalty. For the past 5 minutes, contestant number 1 has been in a private room preparing for the assigned topic presentation. The contestants will be shown a time card at the 3, 4, and 5-minute mark of their assigned topic discourse. If there is a violation of a time requirement, there will be a penalty of 1 point for each minute or fraction thereof assessed against the contestant's total score. The topic of the contestants will address during this portion of the contest is Amendment 21. Number 1, the 18th Article of Amendment to the Constitution of the United States is hereby repealed. Number 2, the transportation or importation into any state, territory, or possession of the United States for delivery or use therein of intoxicating liquors in violation of the laws thereof is hereby prohibited. Number 3, the article shall be inoperative unless it shall have been ratified as an amendment to the Constitution by the conventions in several states as provided in the Constitution, within 7 years from the date of the submission hereof to the states by the Congress. Ladies and gentlemen, contestant number 1.
The 21st Amendment is the only amendment to our Constitution that has the fundamental intent of repealing a previous amendment, the 18th. Springing from temperance organizations that formed during the early 1800s and the moral refocusing of the Second Great Awakening, the call for the abolition of alcohol ultimately resulted in the ratification of the 18th Amendment, which initiated prohibition. Initially, the goal of temperance unions was met. Public disorderliness diminished. Crime tapered. The consumption of alcohol ebbed. It was not long, however, before all of the desired positive effects took an upswing in an opposite, unexpected fashion. Crime not only increased, but became professional in the form of sophisticated criminal organizations and gangs. Production and sale of alcohol went further underground. The Moderation League tracked arrests due to drunkenness and alcohol-related causes and saw an increase between the years of 1923 and 1926, arguing that hidden alcohol consumption resulted in higher liquor-related arrests. Americans were disillusioned. Journalist H.L. Mencken wrote in 1925 that, "There is not less drunkenness in the Republic, but more. Not less crime, but more. Respect for law has not increased, but diminished." State and federal government coffers lost billions of dollars in tax revenue, money that instead lined the affluent pockets of organized crime leaders, such as Chicago's Al Capone. Americans blamed prohibition for the moral decay and disorder. President Hoover remarked in a campaign speech that grave abuses have occurred, abuses which must be remedied. Longtime abstainer J.D. Rockefeller, who had invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in the Anti-Saloon League, withdrew his support of prohibition once he recognized the widespread problems it caused. The United States government spent $300 million enforcing a law that lost the Treasury $11 billion. The destitution of the Great Depression hastened the calls to repeal the 18th Amendment, seeing the formation of the nonpartisan Americans Against Prohibition Association. Franklin D. Roosevelt campaigned on an anti-prohibition stance. His presidential victory in 1932 spelled doom to what Hoover had earlier termed the noble experiment. Because temperance unions wielded a powerful lobby, the verbiage of the 21st Amendment called for ratifying committees rather than state legislature approval. Indeed, the 21st Amendment is the only constitutional amendment to have been ratified by, essentially, referendum. Article 5 of the Constitution permits this form of ratification for potentially highly sensitive votes. This unique approach was precipitated by the fact that most state legislators were not willing to risk the career or political backlash of repeal. Ratifying committees were presumably composed of average-day citizens who were able to express their views without the fear of punitive repercussions. It took fewer than 8 months for the necessary 36 states to ratify the amendment. Section 2 of the 21st Amendment led states to assert ultimate control over the importation and sale of liquor within their borders. Although some states, counties, and municipalities remained dry, interpretations of the 21st Amendment resulted in lawsuits exploring the legality of liquor license control. Regardless of application of the amendment, it can be said that after its ratification in 1933, many Americans agreed with the adage that after 14 years with nothing to drink, the American people were thirsty. Thank you.
The time for contestant number 1 is 4 minutes and 39 seconds. There are no time penalties. Ladies and gentlemen, contestant number 2.
It was called the Noble Experiment. In President Herbert Hoover's words, it was a great social and economic experiment, noble in motive and far-reaching in purpose. Today, we call it prohibition. The 18th Amendment to the Constitution prohibited the manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquors. The 18th Amendment, passed in 1919, was repealed by the 21st Amendment in 1933. The 21st Amendment devolved regulatory authority of alcohol back to the states after the 18th Amendment failed. Before discussing the 21st Amendment, it's important to understand the 18th Amendment. The main supporters of prohibition were those who saw the problems that alcohol abuse could cause and sought to eliminate or reduce them. In 1873, the Women's Christian Temperance Union was already advocating for a ban on the sale of alcohol. The Anti-Saloon League joined their cause, and the two groups became a very powerful lobby. Now, as Professor Robert P. George notes, there were people who supported prohibition for the wrong reasons. According to George, some supported prohibition out of racism and bigotry as they connected alcohol with certain groups of people. But many were motivated by an honest desire to address serious problems caused by alcohol abuse. George outlines in detail that those advocates of prohibition hoped it would significantly reduce alcohol abuse, addiction, and consumption, resulting in fewer alcohol-related illnesses and accidents, and a reduction in alcohol-fueled violence and other social evils. The 21st Amendment was passed because, despite its intentions, prohibition failed. First of all, there were the economic issues. As one would expect from prohibition, thousands of jobs were lost in the alcohol industry. While the economic impacts were large, they could possibly have been outweighed if prohibition was in fact a moral victory that cured the problems caused by alcohol abuse. But prohibition largely failed to create those improvements. One of the most commonly cited shortcomings of prohibition is the effect that it had on organized crime. Gangs of bootleggers made millions running illegal enterprises. In fact, Al Capone earned around $60 million from his illegal business. Corruption was a rampant issue as law enforcement officers were often bribed to ignore an illegal trade. Prohibition also had serious health effects. Due to the unregulated nature of the alcohol trade, the quality of alcohol declined greatly. As a result, many people died from drinking tainted liquor. But the largest undermining of Prohibition was that it failed to do what it set out to do, namely address alcohol abuse. According to historian Michael Lerner, it is very clear that in many parts of the United States, more people were drinking and people were drinking more. The cumulative effect of all these issues was to force the passage of the 21st Amendment, repealing Prohibition. What are the effects of the 21st Amendment, and what can we learn from it? The Constitution intended to make the federal government strong enough to be effective, but not to infringe on the state's rightful authority. As the 10th Amendment provides, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. The 21st Amendment is an example of giving regulation and authority back to the individual states. The 21st Amendment also teaches us a lesson regarding the treatment of policies. No matter the intentions, if a policy causes more harm than good, it should probably be reconsidered. The motives behind the policy may be sound, but if it fails, it is then necessary to find alternative means of achieving those goals. The noble experiment of the 18th Amendment fell short. It was mostly well-intentioned, but failed to find success and caused numerous problems. That is why the 21st Amendment was passed, giving regulatory authority of alcohol back to the states. In the case of alcohol regulation, America has chosen to leave it mostly to the individual and municipalities. Sometimes governmental regulation is harmful, as in the case of Prohibition. Other times it is beneficial and necessary. Not all noble experiments work, and not all experiments that work are noble. We should consider the net benefits of policies. We must also consider their morality. Thank you.
The time for contestant number 2 is 4 minutes and 40 seconds. There are no time penalties. Ladies and gentlemen, contestant number 3.
January of 1919. It was a cold month. World War I had just ended, soldiers were returning home to their families, and America was just about to enter the Roaring '20s. However, while soldiers were resting, political activists were moving. This is the day that the 18th Amendment would pass, the amendment that banned the sale and purchase of alcohol in the United States. The people who supported the 18th Amendment were optimistic that it would change America for the better. There'd be less crime, more productivity, and a return to family values in the United States. Unfortunately, this was not the case. In fact, crime skyrocketed during these times. Bank robbers, gangsters, and the mafia all became infamous, like Al Capone or Bonnie and Clyde. Black markets of alcohol rose up, and people simply kept drinking. Finally, Franklin D. Roosevelt proposed the 21st Amendment in order to repeal the 18th and to make alcohol legal in the United States once again. The 18th Amendment was a highly unpopular amendment, but despite its unpopularity, it took nearly 14 years for it to be finally repealed. Why did such an unpopular amendment take so long to repeal? Well, we can find the answer to that question inside of the 21st Amendment itself. Let me explain. Section 1 of the 21st Amendment repeals the 18th, effectively federally legalizing alcohol in the United States. Section 2 leaves the issues and laws surrounding alcohol down to the states, but Section 3 is where it truly gets interesting. Quote, "This article shall be inoperative unless it shall have been ratified as an amendment to the Constitution by conventions in the several states, as provided in the Constitution," end quote. Section 3 of the 21st Amendment is what makes this amendment so unique. This is the first and only amendment to be ratified using state convention instead of state legislature, meaning that the people were able to vote and decide if this amendment should be ratified by their state. But why was it ratified using state convention instead of state legislature? To put it simply, it was because of money in politics. The temperance movement was a powerful interest group that had lots of money and influence. Millionaires like John Rockefeller and his oil companies continuously donated to the temperance movement and its causes. If you wanted to win in state legislature, you had to have the kind of money that the temperance lobby provided. Knowing this, FDR and his Congress circumvented state legislature and left it directly down to the people in the form of state convention. By doing this, they almost guaranteed the passing of the 21st Amendment. The use of state convention is why alcohol in America is the way it is today. So, should we take note of how money influenced politics in a way that misrepresented the people? Does money still play such a powerful role in our government to this day? I challenge you to ponder these questions and to truly think about the role that money has on our government. Thank you.
The time for contestant number 3 is 3 minutes and 36 seconds. There is no time penalties. This concludes the competition portion of this program. Will the judges and tabulators please go directly to the tabulation room for the determination of contest results. At this time, we'll take a short recess. Thank you. be starting in just a minute. Well, good morning again. Before we make the formal introductions of our contestants and judges panel, I'd first like to recognize a few of our distinguished guests. A gentleman who has attended many national final contests while serving as the national adjutant and a great friend of the oratorical program, ladies and gentlemen, past national commander and past national adjutant, Mr. Robert Spinogle. Bob, thank you for being here. And this morning we also are pleased to have our current National Adjutant of the American Legion, Mr. Dan Wheeler, and his lovely wife, Kathy. Thank you for being here. And I would also, I think there's a couple other people that I think I should recognize. I believe we have another past national commander in the audience. It's hard for me to see through these lights, but I think past national commander Marty Knetzer is here. And his wife, who is a past auxiliary president, national, is Sharon Knetzer. Thank you for being here. And I would like, again, to recognize the national commander of the SAL is here with us today, Doc Gibbs. Doc, thank you. I also would like to recognize our national commander to the nation's largest service organization of wartime veterans, National Commander of the American Legion, Brett Rystad. Good. Thank you. I'd also like to acknowledge the gentleman who is serving as the chairman of the American Legion's Americanism Commission, who has the policy-making responsibility for this American Legion's National High School Oratorical Contest, Mr. Richard Anderson. And Richard would like to present to our national commander, and I'll read this, to National Commander Brett Rystad. With our sincere appreciation for your loyal support, the 82nd Annual American Legion High School Oratorical Scholarship Program, a Constitutional Speech Contest, April 7, 2019.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank both of you for your leadership. I would also like to publicly thank all of those individuals who have assisted with the final contest today and without whom this national contest could not be possible. Our judges, the timekeepers, our tabulators, the assigned topic preparation room monitors, ushers, and escorts, would you all please stand to be recognized? We'd also like to recognize and extend our gratitude to Mr. Carl Mills, the Vice President, Fifth Third Bank, who is joined here with his wife, Susie. Carl, are you here? I don't see him. But the 82nd National High School Oratorical Finals, sponsored in part by Fifth Third, they generously donated $10,000 so that we could do this. Thank you, Mr. Mills. And at this time, I would like to recognize our outstanding panel of judges. As your name is called, please come forward so that the National Commander and the Americanism Chairman may present you with a token of our appreciation. Dr. David Azaride. He is the director of the B. Kenneth Simon Center for Principles and Policies Heritage Foundation. David studies the American political tradition from founding until today, with a particular emphasis on contemporary political movements. He has taught college classes on American conservative and progressive political thought. His writings have appeared in various publications, and he has also appeared on television in the U.S., Canada, and the United Kingdom. Mr. Terry Cherry from Constituting America. Terry is on the advisory board of Constituting America and serves as a We the Future contest judge and school speaker in their George Washington We Are All Americans school speaking program. Terry is also the immediate past president of the National Council on Social Studies, a high school teacher for the past 20 years. He has served as educator advisor for the Sixth Floor Museum in Dallas, the Dallas Holocaust Museum, and is active with the Educators Advisory Council of the Dallas Federal Reserve Bank. Next is Ms. Kim Cromer. She is the Executive Director of the National Christian Forensics and Communications Association. Kim holds a Master of Science in Human Nutrition from Clemson University and has taught as an adjunct professor at several community colleges and is a high school science teacher. She has served as Regional Director, Director of Forensics, and now serves as the Executive Director for the National Christian Forensics and Communications Association. Next is Ms. Kathy Gillespie. She is the co-chair of Constituting America, a nonpartisan educational organization that promotes students and adults to learn more about the Constitution throughout all forms of media. Constituting America was founded by actress Janine Turner, and Kathy has served in the capacity of co-chair since Constituting America's founding in 2010. Kathy has held numerous positions in government and politics over the past 34 years, including a Congressional Chief of Staff and member of the President's Commission on White House Fellows. Kathy was recently appointed to the United States Semi-Quincentennial, hopefully I said that right, Commission, the commission established by Congress to provide for the observance and commemoration of the 250th anniversary of the founding of our great United States. Next is Miss Jennifer Jerome, National Speech and Debate Association. Jennifer is currently coaching at Millard West High School in Omaha, Nebraska. She has been coaching since 1989 and a member coach since 1996. She has served on the Nebraska District Committee since 2002, serving as chair multiple times. Jennifer was awarded the James Thurber Distinguished Teacher Award by the Nebraska Speech, Communication, and Theater Association in 2010. She was also awarded the National Speech and Debate Association's Nebraska District Coach of the Year in 2015 and 2018, and is a 4-diamond coach.
Thank you so much, gentlemen.
And last but not least, Mr. Gary Williams, Assistant Vice President, Enterprise Brand Management Affinity Relationship Team of USAA. Gary graduated from Wake Forest University with a degree in chemistry. He was accepted to dental school, but before the start of his school year, his life changed and he was recruited and joined the United States Air Force, where he served his country for 8 years. Following his Air Force career, Gary worked 5 years in manufacturing for Sara Lee Corporation, and during that time he completed an MBA from Wake Forest School of Management. A little change right now. Each of our national finalists receives an automatic berth in either the original oratory or U.S. exempt category in the national tournament of the National Speech and Debate Association, to be held this June in Dallas, Texas. At this time, I would like to call Jennifer. At this time, I would like to call Jennifer Jerome of the National Speech and Debate Association to come forward to join the other presenters, please. Jennifer will be presenting each of our 3 finalists a certificate of recognition for their outstanding achievement and a letter of invitation to the National Speech and Debate Association's national tournament. You should know that in 2019, more than 150,000 high school and middle school students representing 3,500 high schools and 500 middle schools nationwide built their communication, leadership, cognitive, and presentational skills as members of the National Speech and Debate Association. Throughout its 90-year history, the National Speech and Debate Association has consistently provided outstanding infrastructure and support services for high school speech and debate programs, and support for other organizations and contests that promotes forensics activities. I think you'll also be happy to know that the American Legion has enjoyed a mutual beneficial relationship with the National Speech and Debate Team since 2010. Thank you, Jennifer. And now I would like to introduce you to 3 other people. Appearing as contestant number 1 is Eden Carnes, and she is of Friendsville, Tennessee. She is a freshman at the Disco Institute. Please stand up and be recognized. Thank you. Appearing as contestant number 2 is from Homer, Glen, Illinois. His name is Caleb Maue, and he is a, please go ahead. He is a junior, homeschooled, and thank you, ma'am. And contestant number 3, his name is Patrick Junker. And Patrick, please stand. He is from Waukee, Iowa. He is a junior at Van Meter High School. Patrick, thank you. I think I've got a piece of paper here that I now got to pull out of my pocket. And now, the moment we've been waiting for, the announcement of the outcome of this contest. The winner of a $14,000 scholarship is Eden Carnes of Tennessee. The winner of a $16,000 scholarship is Caleb Maue of Illinois. And the champion of the 82nd Annual American Legion National High School Oratorical Scholarship Program is, Patrick Junker of Iowa. Patrick is the winner of an $18,000 scholarship and an all-expense-paid trip to the 101st Annual National Convention of the American Legion here in Indianapolis this summer from August 23rd to the 27th as a member of the American Legion Youth Champions Delegation. Please join me in another round of applause. These kids are great. Wow. We will be honoring all 53 national contestants this afternoon at 1 p.m. at the awards luncheon to be held in Golden Ballroom 1 through 5 at this hotel. We ask everyone to please honor the seating assignments of the ballroom. Contestants will be seated toward the front of the room as guests of honor so they may receive their recognition, and all other ticket holders are welcome to be seated at any table with a table tent reading general seating. And I would ask that at the conclusion of this contest, that all 53 contestants remain here, come up front to the auditorium so that we may take pictures. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for our benediction. Father Gary Gumesheimer, past National Chaplain of the Sons of the American Legion, will lead us in our closing prayer.
Gracious and wonderful God, we thank you for the many blessings that we have observed this week, for the young people who have shared their gifts and their talents with us. We give you praise and thanks for the families, the schools, the guardians, the counselors that help them get where they are today. We have been blessed to listen to their wisdom. Now we ask that that gift of wisdom become a part of all of our lives so that we may go forth from here to carry on the duties and obligations that these young people have shared with us. And as we leave, dear Lord, we ask you to bless us in these words. May the road rise to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face and the rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. Amen.
Amen. Please recover. And please join me in a salute to our colors. Hand salute. 2. This concludes the 82nd Annual American Legion High School Oratorical Scholarship Program, a constitutional speech contest. Thank you for attending, and we'll see you at the banquet.